topic for Tuesday nights. You know, it's not like my regular class. So I'm looking for interesting things. If anyone has any ideas, you know, email me privately, text me. We'll see what to do the next few weeks. So for tonight, I figured I was going to take a very side topic. Just talk about, to me, it was an interesting topic. I hope you'll agree. Can a Jew walk into a church? There's no reason that it came up now, but it's something that does constantly come up. And I'm gonna list to you 4 or 5 different scenarios where it can easily come up. The first scenario is you're going on a tour, and you got a good deal to go on a tour of Rome. Now Rome has a very rich Jewish history. You know, after the Second Temple was destroyed, there's a Jewish community there thousands of years, but it's also the place where the Vatican is. There are endless claims that the temples, that the relics from the Second Temple are there, and there are certainly manuscripts from all those hundreds of years of pogroms in Europe and the Crusades, when they stole all sorts of Jewish manuscripts and killed Jews, and they're sitting in the Vatican. I remember my father-in-law, one time he was so upset. I mean, when he got upset, these are things that really bothered him. They were advertising all over. There's a rare book show, because there are books on loan from the Vatican that are coming to New York, and whoever wants to come see them there. And my father was fuming, rightfully so. He said these books were taken when they killed Jews and stole it from them, and now we have to go see it on loan, take it and bring it to Israel, and it's ours. This is absurd, which it is, but whatever. But there are people who like to travel to a library there just to see these rare manuscripts. So can one go into the Vatican for touring, or how about not the Vatican itself or the church itself, the buildings nearby? Could one go? Or how's this one? Constantly comes up. You're walking home, and there's a church, and you live like around the corner. It's a 90-degree, so it just save you much more time if you could just cut across the yard of the church and then come in. You don't have to walk all the way around. Can you do that? Is there any issue doing that or not? And how about another case? There's a funeral, or there's a wedding, and for social reasons, it'll be, you know, you fear you may offend someone if you don't go, or you're a repairman, and they call you up to do repairs in the local. Could you go in to do? So these are all scenarios that can really come up. Now, aside from these scenarios, we're going to give you another scenario, which came up in World War II, which is, can you run into a church to save your life? If you'd be able to hide out in a church, this did come up. It really came up in Jewish history. Can you run into a church to save your life? So even if we're going to say that you can't walk into church under normal circumstances, how about to save your life? And the clincher will be in 2009. In January 2009, the following question came up, and it was extremely relevant. Barack Obama won the election. He was being sworn in January 2009. Now, forgive me if I'm going to pronounce it wrong and you're going to laugh at me, but it was a Episcopalian. I hope I pronounced that right. Episcopalian church. And in the swearing-in ceremony, they wanted an Orthodox rabbi to come. They invited an Orthodox rabbi, and the question came, and this rabbi declined the invitation. He felt he was not allowed to go there. And a different Orthodox rabbi took the invitation. So it was a big to-do afterwards among Orthodox rabbis. Can you go? Can't you go? And then, so if we could just touch upon some of these questions, you know, obviously, in the scope of our half-hour discussion, we're not going to, or 20 minutes, whatever, but let's just touch upon it, where this all comes from and what the issues are. And so we're going to start like this. We'll start with the Code of Jewish Law. It's a good way to start. And the Shulchan Aruch tells us, and you forgive me, normally I like to have handouts I want to follow, but the Shulchan Aruch quotes like this, a scenario. A city that has a fair on a Gentile holiday, and the Gentiles are gathered there in honor of their deity, in honor of their idolatry. So the Shulchan Aruch writes that you're not allowed to walk into the city on such a day if you don't live there, if you're a guest, if you're a visitor. If you live there, you're allowed to walk in. Shulchan Aruch says one more statement that I'll read to you before. Shulchan Aruch says that it's a mitzvah to distance yourself from the path of idolatry 4 amets, 4 cubits. We'll say that for tonight, we'll say it's 8 feet. So you should stay 8 feet away from the path of idolatry. These are 2 statements in Shulchan Aruch. Now, the classic commentator, the Shach, quotes the words of Maimonides, the words of the Rambam, who writes the following. Now, listen to these words of Maimonides, and it may blow your mind like it blew mine, but this is what he writes. He says, you should know that any city of non-Jewish city that has in it a house of idol worship, so let's say it has a church in it, that city you're not allowed to go visit, and you're certainly not allowed to live there. Now, can you imagine that? So where can we live? If we would stop right here, which is never a good thing to do, you don't stop in the middle, but if we would stop right here, and then we say to ourselves, where could you live? So we're going to have to get the next convenient plane to Mars or to the moon. Where are you going to live? You can't even live in cities in Israel. They have, but where? So Maimonides continues though. He says, however, today when we are under the dominion of the non-Jews and we live in their lands, it's been fulfilled that that the hands of the Gentiles that have wooden and stone deities. So we have no choice. We live there. But the Maimonides concludes if you can't go into the city, certainly to go into the house of idol worship itself is not permitted. He says almost not even to see it, but certainly not to walk into it. So these are the clear words of Maimonides. This is where so the bottom line is that for us to go into a church is certainly something that we can't do. Now, but Moshe Feinstein was asked, how about I'm going into the church, I'm not going in there to participate in a religious ceremony. I'm not going in there I'm only going in there just to see. Okay, now don't laugh at me again. Michelangelo, was that the guy that made the very famous, fancy, beautiful paintings and it was done in churches, or am I right?
Sistine Chapel.
So I want to go,
Sistine Chapel.
Sistine Chapel. So I want to go see. I listen. It's world renowned. Even Travisky heard of it. It's very famous, and I'm sure it's very beautiful. And I want to just go see it. So am I allowed to not? So Feinstein writes. He says like this. He says that you can't go in. He said you can't even look at a picture that was made to beautify a church. He said let's say you're going to the courtyard, and in the case when you're allowed to go to a courtyard, you would be allowed to look at a picture of a king, a picture that's social. But any picture that would be made to beautify a church, even if it's not the actual cross itself, it's made to decorate the church, that also will be included in this restriction. So the bottom line is that to go into the actual church itself of the Vatican, and forgive me my ignorance, I'm not sure exactly, Vatican City, there's got to be a lot of buildings there. But the actual place where they do the actual service, that would not be allowed. Even if you're touring and you just want to go see it, you wouldn't be allowed to go just to see it. Now, to go for a social reason, there's also, you can't go in, you can't go in. I know this comes up, and I know Orthodox rabbis that have to go to funerals as part of the respect for but they'll stand outside the church. They'll stand outside the church and they'll explain that they came to pay respects. And I think with any reasonable, and I've had quite a few dealings with reasonable non-Jewish officials here, and they've been very understanding. Anything that comes to religion, they understand it. It's a religious thing, but you're paying your respect, you're spending your time, you're something. I think it's now, what about the buildings around it, though? When you're not going to the church itself, you're going to the buildings around it. So there we call the Ramah. Ramah Islis discusses the courtyard of the church. Now, listen to what he says. As always, he brings 2 opinions, but this is what he says. He says, the courtyard of the idol house. Some say that it's like a city of non-Jews, that if there's no active worship going on, you're allowed to go there. Some say you can't no matter what, unless there's a pathway through it that goes somewhere else. If there's a pathway going to somewhere else, in other words, you're cutting through the yard or you're driving through a shortcut, that would be permitted. And he says that is the custom, to go through a pathway or a shortcut in such a yard. It's a midas chasidus. It's a pious thing not to go there if there's another way to go that's just as short. So you would be allowed to take that shortcut through the yard as long as there's no act of worship going on. To go into the yard itself just to see it, or the other building just to see it, would depend on these two opinions in the Ramah. And when we were kids in school, they taught us, this is how we grew up. They taught us that if you're walking down the street and there's a church, you have to cross the street. So they taught us. Again, I think it's only obviously a thing of piety. It's not an obligation, but that's what they wanted us to it was ingrained from childhood. That's how they wanted us to do. Now, how about to save your life? And it's well known that there were stories in World War II, people running away from the Nazis who hid out in churches, hid out in basements of churches, hid out in all sorts of scenarios. So here we get to a very interesting question. And I want to just give a little background to appreciate the question. A Jewish person is faced with a life-threatening situation. Do you break a rule of the Torah to save a life or not? So we all know that there are 613 commandments. 610 of the 613, you're obligated to push away the commandment to save a life. And my father choked on Pesach, so we had 6 or 8 Hatzalah cars there within a minute or two, and they were all desecrating the holiday to save a life. That's what the mitzvah is obligatory, not a mitzvah. It's obligatory to save a life. We break. There are 3 cardinal sins that we don't, even to save a life, we're not allowed to do. What are the 3 cardinal sins that we can't break no matter what? Idol worship, illicit relations, and murder. No matter what, a person puts a gun to your head and says, either you bow to that cross or I'll shoot you, you say, go ahead and shoot. A person puts a gun to your head and says, either kill that guy or I'll shoot you, go ahead and shoot. A person puts a gun to your head and says, do illicit relations, go ahead and shoot. There's no, those 3 cardinal sins, there's no, that's we call in Hebrew, Yahareg Vayav. A person has to give their life rather than transgress them. So now the question is, what about going into the following scenario? I'm sorry, before I get to the case of the church, before I get to that, the following scenario. There's an Asherah tree. Now, most of us never heard of Asherahs, but in the biblical times, Asherah was a very common form of idol worship. It was trees that the non-Jews served, real idols. And that's nothing, these are real hardcore idols. So what was in those times to bow down to Asherah tree was obviously you couldn't do. A person got deathly ill. They got deathly ill, and the only way to heal them was to use the wood of the Asherah tree to create some sort of. So the Talmud says they have to give their life rather than use it, even though it's not bowing down to idol worship. It's called Abizrayo. It's called the dust of idol worship. So the question that came up was, would be entering the church be similar to this case of healing oneself with the idol wood, or is it different? And you have a different opinion. The Rashba actually said one would not be allowed to, but we in Shulchan Aruch, we say you're allowed to. We say you're allowed to. The Shulchan Aruch writes, the person who's under life-threatening situation is allowed to run into a house of idol worship to save their life. Why? Why is it different? So it's very interesting. The Rush writes 2 reasons why it's different. It says, number 1, you're not using the church or the house of idols to save yourself. You're hiding there, but it's not like where it's the actual thing that's healing you. And number 2, it's not the actual idol. It's the house that houses the idols. It's not the actual idol. For both these reasons, it's different. And for both these reasons, it was permitted. And people did this when the Nazis were trying to kill all the Jews. People did do this. They hid out in churches and managed to save a life. So that, he says, is permitted. But this is only to save a life. The Dr. Tshuva writes, he says, however, if it's only to save money, if you're scared of robbers, or then you're not allowed to run into the church. He quotes here a story, if you know, a little interesting story, but the Sefer Hasidim writes, this is from hundreds of years ago, he writes the following: there was a non-Jew who owed a Jewish guy money. Now listen to the story. So every time the Jewish guy met the non-Jew on the street, and he was asking him for the money, what did the non-Jew do? He wanted to get away from him. He ran into the church. So now what's a Jew going to do? So this was schlepping on for quite a while. And the Jewish guy got very frustrated. So one day, the non-Jew ran into the church. The Jewish guy just ran after him to get his money. He ran into the church. Afterwards, this Jewish guy felt very guilty for what he did, for running into the church. And he went to his rabbi and asked him, what should I do? Listen to the rabbi told him. The rabbi told him, mark down the day on the calendar that you walked into the church. And every year on that day, you should fast to atone. So just a sign of how strongly they felt about this, even though it wasn't running in to participate in the service. He was just trying to get back the money he was owed. Just how strong they felt about it. Anyway, the question now is, how about going in for a political reason, like for President Obama's inauguration? So there's a fascinating response written in 1949 in the city Cairo. Now, I'm sure most of you heard of Chacham Ovadia Yosef. Chacham Ovadia Yosef was one of the greatest sages who lived in our times. He was alive. He died, I don't know, 10 years ago, whatever it was, 8 years ago. But he was a Sephardic rabbi, grew up in Egypt. He became chief rabbi of Israel. A genius, an absolute genius. The story goes that they put him against the computer and he knew more Torah responses than the computer. That's the story that goes. And he was definitely beyond an amazing person. Anyway, he was asked this question in Cairo when he was still living in Cairo in the year 1949, right after Israeli independence. And the way he writes it, I'm not so sure a non-Jewish council died. I don't know if that's an ambassador, I don't know, but a council died and they were bringing him into the church. So apparently, we know Egypt's a Muslim country, so I don't didn't even know if it was, and he was asked by the chief rabbi, I don't know if there was a chief rabbi in Europe, chief rabbi of Israel. He was asked, but that the king had asked the chief rabbi to go to the church for the funeral or for the eulogy, whatever it was, and he wanted to know if he could go because it's ways of peace with the king. Now, Chacham Ovadia Rabbi Yosef has here pages written on it. The bottom line, just as we're going to go through the bottom line, he says is absolutely forbidden. He says not allowed to. It's not life-threatening. Will not be allowed to go. Quotes there a very interesting. I found an interesting story. He says that there was going back hundreds of years, there was a group of rabbis who walked into a church from behind a curtain on a non-Jewish holiday to learn the music of the church so they could use that music in their services. That's the way he quotes the story. So Chacham Ovadia says, the way they told me this story, I find it very hard to accept the story. Number one, he says, man, I listen to the services and enjoy the music of it. You can't not do that. Number two, they're not allowed to enter a church. So he says, I don't know if the whole story is true. He said, if the story is true, either they were rabbis that didn't know what they were doing, or he said maybe they thought that for peace with the local government, they were pressured. Someone said they'll fire them from the job if they don't do it. He says, I don't know what happened, but the bottom line was, it was absolutely, if it did happen, it was absolutely wrong that rabbis should go to a church or a house of idol worship and as rabbis and would not be allowed. That's what and then he goes on. He absolutely he closes his chapter there. He says that if someone will tell you what the minhag is, the custom is that they go. He says, I want to remind everyone that the Hebrew letters minhag, which means custom, is mem, nun, hey, and gimel. He says there's another word with the same letters, just spelled a little differently. That word is Gehenna. Gehenna is gimel, hey, nun, mem. Gehenna is purgatory, we call it hell, whatever. He says sometimes people claim that they have a minhag, but the minhag is not a good thing, and it will end up in bad places. So, be it as it may, he was very opposed to it. Again, I'm not going to say there was a rabbi who went. He felt that there is a justification based on the ways of peace with the government. So, again, in short, to save a life, no question, one would be allowed to enter a church, and one should save a life. If it's permitted, you should save a life. Short of that, one would not be allowed to enter the church. If there's a government issue, and it's the government officials, there were two schools of thought. Chacham Ovadia was very opposed to it. There were those who did it. I personally wouldn't want to be doing it, but short of that, it's just a social thing that I think the right thing to do is just explain in very gentle and friendly terms and show that you care. I think most people, they taught us this in rabbinic training, and it's borne out in life. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's just as long as you convey that you care and you feel and you empathize and you mean it from the heart. Things that come from the heart go to the heart, and in most cases, I can't say, but in most cases, you do it with reasonable people, you'll be able to explain and understood. And at the end of the day, the law is the law. We can't. Rosie, you came on now. How are you? And Steve Helbig, how are you?
I'm good. I just took an hour and a half walk. I didn't realize what time it was.
Oh, you're in Florida?
I'm still in Florida. Yep.
Okay.
Till June 7th.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Rabbi, question.
Let's see.
Rabbi,
Sure.
can you go into a mosque?
Oh, excellent. Excellent. We didn't get to that. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Okay, so the Rambam writes, Maimonides writes, and Chacham Avadi talks about it in a different place. A mosque is not called a house of idol worship, and a mosque is one would be allowed to go into. And he said it for Israeli soldiers who needed a place to daven and to make a minyan, and they were offered a local mosque. And he said you're allowed to, and it comes up very relevant now in Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the Cave of the Patriarchs, where the Arabs do services. And he says absolutely no question you're allowed to have a minyan there, you're allowed to pray there, because it's not called idol worship. They have a prophet they believe in that's not true prophet, but idol worship is not. On the other hand, Christianity, when you start dealing with Trinity and with Shituf, with the idea that there's more than one God or Trinity, whatever it is, that's for a Jew, that's absolutely, a person has to give their life before believing such things, and no question for us, it's unacceptable.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure, who are you? One second, who's talking?
It's Fern.
Oh, Fern, how are you? Okay.
Fine. I have a question. If in my area there's a church that has a food bank, and once in a while I volunteer there. I'm not anywhere where they have the service. I'm in a different room. Is that okay?
What do you mean? It's in the church?
Well, it's in the building of the church.
In the side room?
Yeah.
That would depend on the two opinions in the Ramah. If you really want me to check, I want to look into it. I don't want to say anything off the cuff. I'd rather double check. I will tell you this, that it came up years ago when I was in Lakewood. The voting was done 1 year in a local church. And they told us that you were allowed to go to vote. And it was not in the church where they had the services, obviously. But I would like to just double check if you don't mind.
Okay, I appreciate it.
What about, Rabbi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
What about if you go, I'm sorry, you may have said this already, and how about if you go into a non-Catholic church where they don't have the crosses and the J hang, J on the cross? Because that's just in the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Okay, so Rosie, I'm going to tell you right now, you got me. I'm not familiar, one thing I know, any form of shituf, that means any form of belief Christianity believes in more than one deity, is idol worship for a Jew, and you cannot go into such a place. A mosque, like Steve mentioned before, is different. Are there any Christians that would be similar to a mosque? I'm going to have to try to look into this. I forgive my ignorance. The old saying, ignorance is bliss. I know not all Christians are exactly the same, but I really never, so I want to try to find out. I'm very curious now myself, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I was once driving, I don't know if you remember when Acme became a superstore here and became open 24 hours?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember. So there was a guy there, the manager was named Mike Moyer. So I went over to him one day and I said, Mike, can you make a kosher section? A real kosher, not kosher style, a real. So I took him, we went in the car together to Twin Rivers, to Heights, whatever, to see the shop right there, the kosher section. I wanted to show him. So we were in a half hour there, half hour back. So we're schmoozing and he told me that he's Lutheran.
Your voice it's cracking now.
I'm sorry. He told me he was Lutheran. Anyway, he was trying to explain to me all the different denominations of Christianity. Like, there's the Catholic, the Protestant, the Episcopalian. I was lost. I was totally lost. So
Uh-huh.
I want to double check this question. And next Tuesday, when we start, I just want to try to answer those two questions that you had. And then we'll
Okay.
move on to the next topic.
Rabbi, can you hear me? I got a
Yeah, but
question.
who are you? Who
I
is
don't
this?
see you.
It's Hunter.
Who's talking?
It's Hunter.
We
Hunter,
can't-
how are you, Hunter?
I'm all right. How about you?
Rabbi, we
I'm
can't see
okay.
you. I
So,
can't see.
yeah, my camera is not on. So the rabbi will come back up if you're looking at the speaker view.
Oh, okay.
But so my question is kind of on these same lines, but it's more of how we go about answering it. So if you're talking about different types of Christianity, and this is a conversation I've had with a lot of my Christian friends, just something that is curious to me. So, you know, I've done a lot of research. I've had them explain, you know, their various different views, and you break it down there by types of Christianity, and they all kind of have different answers to that stuff. But my question is, so if you're talking to somebody who has their religion and they say, like, for instance, you know, there's a common idea that the Trinity is the same thing. The best way I could describe it would be like how Hashem has multiple names, which stand for multiple of his virtues, right? Does that make sense?
Oh,
Hold on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's just an example. But my question is, I happen to disagree with their analysis, but would the ruling be based on their analysis or our analysis of their analysis? Does that make sense? I know it's a complicated question.
Well, you know, I think it's similar to Rosie's question. The bottom line is, what is you know, they're telling you about different manifestations of Hashem is a mistake. There's no.
No. I was trying to. I was using that as an example to explain things that they've said, but that might complicate things more. But I'm just saying, you know, okay, well, we can't. The reason that these rules apply is that we deem it to be idol worship, right?
Right.
So,
right. Correct.
So if they come and they say, "Hey, listen, we're in, you know, this is our religion. They clearly know a bit more about it than any of us," and they say, "As a matter of fact, it's not idol worship." So how do you know that? To put it very simply.
Well, again, if I would try to put it simply like this, if all they're saying is that they had a prophet, like the Muslims say Muhammad was a prophet, they say that guy's a prophet. If that's all they were saying, then we could try to equate Christianity and Muslim. But obviously, that's not what most forms of Christianity are saying. They're saying it's a deity or a trinity, or they're giving some. So once they're saying that, we're out. It's absolute idol worship, and we have to give our life before accepting such things. I'm not familiar if there are some forms of Christianity that are like the Muslims. I would like to research it myself. I'm very curious. I really am. But I do not believe that. I think the overall majority are believing in a Trinity or taking someone as a deity that we absolutely say is a person has to give their life before saying such things or believing such things.
That much makes sense. That if because you're right, there might be some offshoot somewhere that we don't know about, but the vast majority of them, that would be the answer.
Yeah, they all believe in the Trinity, as far as I know.
Well,
And I don't
then we're
think
done.
there's-
It's not,
I don't think there's any group of Christians that are like the Muslims.
all right.
I think it's two apples and oranges.
All right.
And what about Buddhism?
Yeah.
Buddhism is real idol worship, from what I've heard. I'm not familiar with what it is, but I know that's the real deal. That's the real idol worship that in the Western world, well, maybe today, I don't think we even know of it, or at least I don't. I was never exposed to any.
Robert Trubisky, Steve
Yeah.
here.
probably one religion that's sort of pertinent to anyone who's visiting Israel. And one of the sites in Haifa is the Baha'i Temple. So the question is,
Oh, yeah.
Baha'i religion, they're universalistic. I'm not sure, though, if they're monotheistic. I think they are. But that would be a pertinent question for someone who's visiting Israel. They have beautiful gardens and a shrine thing.
Okay, I got my homework for next Tuesday. I'm very
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Mhm.
There's some guys walking around the streets in Ben Salem with orange robes also. And if they called a meeting for all the houses of worship about security a couple of months ago. So we had 27 of us there, and some of the guys were wearing orange robes.
Those are
So,
monks.
I don't know if they're Baha'is. I really want to try to find this out.
Buddhists. They're Buddhists.
Those are Buddhist monks.
Oh, those are Buddhists. Okay.
Yeah, they're probably Buddhists. Yeah. I was in Thailand, so I saw plenty of Buddhists. Very interesting.
Earlier, that if you walk through an area that belongs to a church, that you can probably go through it. What if that area has a statue of something that's Christian?
Well, it's not. I don't believe there's two separate questions you're asking. Question one is, can you walk through? Question two, can you stare at that statue? To walk through, if it may have a statue, but is it a place that they worship or not? If they worship over there, then it's like the church. If they don't worship there, they just have the statue, then it's just like the courtyard of the church, which if you're taking a shortcut there, there definitely would, as far as I see, would be allowed, but you wouldn't be allowed to stare at the statue. You wouldn't be able to enjoy looking at it, and remind that you wouldn't be allowed. I would say it's a pious thing not to walk there, but technically, I think you would be allowed to take the shortcut there if they don't serve there and you're not staring at the statue.
Okay, Rabbi.
Yes, Rosie.
So I went to see the Sistine Chapel when I was in Italy.
Okay.
There was nothing there in that room except, I could see the beautiful, walls, the paintings, it was magnificent. But there were no statues.
Well,
But
it's a chapel. So chapel means they serve there?
But they don't pray there. They don't pray.
Why is it called a chapel? Did they pray there?
Maybe they did at one time, but now it seems like it's just for visitors coming and looking at it.
I think they have hours for visitation as a tourist thing, but they also do services too at different hours.
In that chapel?
Yeah, I think so, but you'd have to check it.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's more than that. If it was once a house of worship, it can't be nullified unless they really nullify it. This comes up a lot, which we're not getting into tonight. A synagogue wants to buy a church that's gone bankrupt or for sale, and how do you do that? But the bottom line is, without nullifying it, you can't go in there. It's a house. It was the house of worship. You can't go in. So if this chapel was used and it was never, just because now they're not using it, wouldn't allow us to just go in there. I don't believe so.
Nullify it.
Huh?
How would you nullify it?
You'd have to have, again, it's not for tonight. It came up, there are a few yeshivas who bought churches and whatever. There are ways to do it, but it's not an overnight thing. Huh? It has to lose its name. I mean, it's not losing its name. If it's Sistine Chapel, it's not losing its name of being a Christian place, right? It's still, so it's not nullified. It's still known as a Christian place.
It's a Christian place, yes. Mm-hmm. I've never seen a synagogue by a church. I've seen churches by synagogues.
No.
And make them into
The
churches.
closest
but
one,
I've
I think,
never
is in
seen the
Newtown.
opposite.
No,
that?
How about in Newtown?
Roman Jewish Day
Oh, you're
School
right.
used to be a
Yeah,
church.
that was a church. You're right.
Staten
You're right.
Island Yeshiva in Staten Island. There are a number of yeshivas and synagogues that have bought.
Oh, okay. You're right. I forgot about the one in Newtown. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was a church, right? So that was nullified.
Yeah,
somehow.
so I'm sure they did it right. There's ways to do it, but
Yeah.
But if it's still called a Christian chapel, it's not nullified.
Rabbi, just looked up the Sistine Chapel. So it was takes its name from Pope Sixtus the Fourth, who restored it between 1473 and 1481. Since that time, it served as a place of both religious and functionary papal activity. Today, it's the site of the papal conclave, in which the process of the new pope is selected. So it's not definitive that they have religious services now, but at one time they did.
Yeah, all right, so it's a
Yeah.
stone chapel.
Okay.
All right. Okay, listen, everyone should stay safe. Everyone should stay well. I hope I see you all again next Tuesday, and we should share good news. Hashem should bring salvation to all of us, the entire Jewish people, my father, and I really hope I'll see you all in person soon. This whole thing should be over, and we should be able to just get together like real and enjoy each other's company.
My condolences to Malky.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Both of her losses.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Thank you.
Maurice lost his son.
Really? I'm so
Yeah,
sorry to hear that. Whoa.
The coronavirus.
Wow.
Yeah. Just it's a little more than a week ago. He just got up from Shiva.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Wow.
Yeah. He couldn't even.
Rabbi,
Sorry.
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Next week, we
Bye-bye.
look forward to seeing you all.
All right,
Bye,
thank you.
everybody. Have a good week.
Yeah. Izzy, how you feeling?
Very good, Baruch Hashem. And you?
Hi, Izzy.
Hi. It's good. It's good hearing you, Rabbi.
It's good seeing you.
Good seeing you. Yeah.
It's good to
Thank
be
you
seen.
so much.
Alan, I got your voicemail. I'm sorry, I didn't respond yet. I'm sorry, it's been very hectic.
That's
Alan,
okay.
I got your voicemail, so I didn't respond yet. But,
If I may say, Steve,
Yeah.
you need a shave.
No, listen,
After the
that's neither here nor there.
Hey, I like the beer. Keep it.
once we get to Lag Bomer,
It's staying on.
it's making you look very old.
Well, I'm a saint.
He's jealous.
Oh my
Steve,
God,
he's
is
just jealous. Don't listen. He's just jealous.
Steve.
But very handsome.
Steve. Where are you, Steve? Let me see you. Where's Steve?
He's the old one.
Oh my God, Steve, shave that off.
Okay.
Shave it off or die.
Actually, I'm getting to like it. I'm going to keep it. I'm making up for what Izzy lost.
I think the beards are the in thing with the coronavirus because my neighbor's growing one too.
Well,
The same
Okay. Very well. Good night. Good night.
Well,
Good night.
bye-bye. Thank you.